Hello and welcome to a special installment of Unraveling Religion. I'm here with my best friend Lisa Carley Hotaling in her 2001 Hyundai Elantra in Buffalo, New York. It is about 11:30 on a Saturday night, and this is generally when Lisa and I just begin our conversations, right? So just a little background information about how this came to being. I had to really coax, cajole, trick, and yes, even convince Lisa to participate in this dialogue. And I'm very happy that I've done so. I want to welcome you, Lisa, to Unraveling Religion. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing awesome.
Awesome.
I'm glad to be here.
So, Lisa, we're armed with some stuff, right?
We are armed with some stuff indeed.
As usual. I mean, we've got all the essentials, right?
We have everything we could possibly need.
It's true, and then some, because we've got Mike's Hard Lemonade, Pringles, American Spirits, Eckhart Tolle, Rumi, and what else?
Kaplo.
We have Roshi Philip Kaplu's Zen Teachings and Practice. So,
and each other.
And each other, which is the most vital aspect. So, but tonight, in talking with Richard Wicca, who is the brainchild of Think Twice Radio, we were discussing a lot of different things, and one of the things that came up was identity. And Lisa and I often talk about identity, and from approaching it from multiple various aspects and deconstructing it in many different ways. And I thought it'd be a good theme for the show, and just wanted to introduce that notion that'll be sort of the theme for tonight's show. So in talking about identity, Lisa, where to begin? Where do we begin with identity?
Well, I think the point that Richard was bringing up earlier about where the locus of identity is probably a good beginning point. Do we have do we derive our identity from an internal sense, or do we extrapolate it from an interpretation of our perception of the environment, or is it some, I guess, constellation of both? Right,
yeah. So, and it's interesting because Richard and I and my friend Graham Sears, who's been a guest on Unraveling Religion, have gone back and forth about pretty much the nature of what is truth and what is reality, and identity fits into that nicely, I think. And I thought that my approach of identity is one that I think is best articulated by Eckhart Tolle's. He approaches it in a few of his works. I love his audiobooks, and there are two that come to mind. One we were just listening to driving over here, and that is In the Presence of a Great Mystery. And in that, Tolle talks about thought forms and about how the child and the toy are the first formation of a story that we create in our minds about who we are. And how that toy, as the child grows in years, transitions to relationships, thought forms of beautiful partners or attractive partners, or some quality of partners that are special, that add to the meaning of what that person's identity is. So that people, in a sense, who are wondering why relationships may not work, may be approaching it not from a position of what may I give, offer, and how may I serve this person, but what is this person adding to my identity? And so I just wanted to know your thoughts about that, Lisa.
I totally agree with that.
You do, yeah.
Completely. I was just having a conversation with another very dear friend recently about the same exact question. And my perspective is that rather than sort of coming into relationship, or even if we're not in relationship and we're seeking relationship, that we're often looking for, as you said, the qualities that another person has that either we feel can accentuate what we already feel about ourselves, or that they have something within them that we feel we lack.
Right.
In other words, more generally, that we come into relationship seeking wholeness. And I guess my own philosophical position in that regard is that what would it be like to come into relationship already feeling whole?
Right. Right. So, yeah, oftentimes we don't examine the reasons why we enter into relationship because of socialization and biology. And so what ends up happening is that the beginning of a relationship, inherent in its beginning, is sort of a story that we tell ourselves that is an end of our story, or completion of our story of who we are, that wholeness that we are all seeking, which really I feel is like an aspect of misdirection, or it's not necessarily misdirection, but really that wanting to merge into wholeness with another human being is an impetus that is directed towards people, because that's what we see and relate to. But that same drive, if turned inward, can be a very powerful tool to commune with ourself, which is sometimes fractured but inherently whole. It's our psychology, psyche, and sort of belief systems that don't allow us to see that clearly. Do you agree? What do you think?
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with that. And, you and I were talking about this the other day, that I think it really depends on your orientation or perception of truth, as you and Richard and Graham have been talking about. And whether you have this sense of that there's an absolute truth, or that truth is something that evolves through the process of being fully present in the moment.
Right.
And how I understand that distinction is that I think if you believe or hold this notion of an absolute truth, then you seek relationship and you seek another person as the truth.
Right.
And that somehow through communion with this other person, that you're going to arrive at some truth that doesn't already exist. And I guess that sort of connects to this idea of wholeness, that if you feel that within yourself you embody this wholeness, then I think that minimizes or takes the edge off of that neediness, that searching for the someone else, to arrive at some absolute truth that feels absent from yourself.
Right. So, so I don't know if listeners have any idea about me at all, but I did want to give a little background about Lisa, and just wanted to, if you could talk a little bit about where you're coming at this from a existential, phenomenological, philosophical perspective, right?
Yeah, I mean that's a big bite to chew off, but yeah, my orientation, anybody that knows me knows that I'm oriented through my own lens of an existential perspective, a phenomenological perspective. And for people who aren't familiar with what that means, or who don't have a real experiential sense of it, and who might perhaps have an intellectual sense of it, my understanding and the way that I try to embody that and live that is that that it's the experience itself that allows us to connect most deeply and authentically on all levels.
Right.
First with ourselves, second with our immediate experiencing, and third with the great mystery that lies outside of ourselves. And I even say that cautiously because, lying outside of ourselves, what is that? Exactly. I mean, my own belief, as you know, is that there is sort of this universal presence, energy, that is both a part of me and connects me to other people as well, as their experience of the universal might be very different. And so I guess I come to this conversation, I come to all of the conversations that we've had from this position of subjective truth. And
So what is subjective truth?
right. And so what I mean by that is that the truth is in the unfolding, and that somehow it's experienced rather than it's something that's sought after. There's a knowing in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
There's this sense of it being in alignment with our authentic expression of the moment and our perception of the moment.
Right.
And a lot of times, like, because you and I both have a background in mental health, that the example that we often use is, well, I don't fully understand the subjective reality of someone, let's say, for example, someone who's sociopathic or who's in the midst of a psychotic episode. And so what I try to do in my relations with people is I try to best understand what their subjective reality is as it's unfolding in the moment.
Sure. And that, what you're talking about has been approached by different people in different ways, but, excuse me, one of the books that come to mind is Gary Zukav and his book, The Seat of the Soul, which was a follow-up book that in content was not associated with his original book, The Dancing Wu-Li Masters, but came out of his experiences writing The Dancing Wu-Li Masters, in which he found he was a layman studying quantum physics, I think, and found that amazing synchronicities began to come about in the writing of the Dancing Wu-Li Masters, and his observation of that process lent itself to his writing The Seat of the Soul. And in a nutshell, The Seat of the Soul is about what Zukav defines as authentic power. And that authentic power, he says, is the alignment with the personality of the soul. And so it sounds like that's one approach of what you're speaking about. What do you think, Lisa?
Yeah, I think that's, I definitely understand where Zukav is coming from that perspective. And, but I think that we get into nebulous territory when we start using language like the soul.
I agree.
Because we don't really clearly have that defined. And from my perspective, I wonder how important it is that we define it.
Sure.
Is it necessary, or is it superfluous? Or is it just a construct for our own infinitude? Maybe that's another way to explain something that is inexplicable, and that is both within our grasp of the moment, but it's out of our intellectual grasp.
Yeah.
So again, I think the infinitude of our being is something that in the moment we can have a connection with another person, or with a waterfall, or something in nature with our child, or whatever experience we happen to be in, listening to a beautiful symphony or a poetry reading as we did tonight.
Yep.
That connects us with that sense of our infinitude.
Yep.
And maybe that's a way to construct the word soul might be a way to sort of conceptualize, intellectualize this notion of infinitude.
Right. Yeah, no, what is the soul? I mean, that's like, what is God? I mean, that's,
right.
It's...
What is truth?
What is truth? I mean, these things are language, lingual constructs. I mean, they're just constructs. They're pointers to something that is ineffable and really beyond the description of language. And so, yeah. But, I think it's really interesting, Lisa, because one of the things that arises for me here now is I know you have done a lot of work, as I have, gone through a long process, a birthing process, to bring who you are in this moment. That has been both a lot of work, but also there's something inherent in you that has not changed, or would you disagree with that statement?
I think that perhaps the unique position of being adopted comes into play in that regard.
Yeah.
To the extent that I think I came into the world a bit unmoored.
Yeah.
And
what the hell does that mean, unmoored?
Unmoored? Yeah, like, you know.
You're Miss GRE.
You know, like a ship out at sea without an anchor.
There you go. I understand now.
And, you know, just kind of feeling a little bit lost on the waves, you know?
Sure, yeah.
Not being anchored particularly by this sense of, oh, this is my family.
Yeah.
You know?
But ultimately, that is our existential condition, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe, you know, when I've pondered it, you know, deeply, as you know that I have, I think that that's been my draw, in fact, to existential thought, is this notion of that, you know, I sort of came in on these very stormy seas without a real, without land in sight, without an anchor, as I said before.
With the illusion of an anchor.
Without any illusions. I think that's even a better qualification, in fact. You know, that I didn't have the illusions that a lot of other people have of like, oh, I'm connected, I'm attached to this particular family, or, you know, whatever that is. And, you know, certainly I was adopted into, you know, a loving family, and, you know, that was great. But I think that...
Did we want to talk about attachment theory here? Why don't we?
Yeah, we can definitely talk about attachment. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about attachment theory.
Yeah, I mean, my as Joel well knows, you know, I've done a lot of research and thinking and writing on attachment theory, and in my own academic work as both a master's level and doctoral level student of psychology, and I wrote my master's thesis on motherhood identity, and so I had to study a lot around attachment issues. And you know, basically attachment theory holds that the first weeks, months of a newborn's life are critical for the formation of attachment to the mother. And that happens through very complex processes that even now we don't fully understand, but we certainly know the neurobiochemical, exactly, right. And, you know, we certainly do understand that there's an exchange of oxytocin, vasopressin, which are hormones that we now understand encourage and facilitate bonding. And so I guess one of the questions arises is, you know, what happens to a child that doesn't get that foundation at an early age?
Right.
And I think that certainly looking at the trajectory of my own life, the trajectory of my own relationships, that I can definitely see where that has had some impact in my life.
Sure.
However, I don't see it as a negative, having had negative consequences, particularly in my life. Others might perceive that differently. But again, being a phenomenologist, you know, I come from the perspective of what's my experience.
And what is negative, what is positive.
And what is negative and what is positive.
Those are judgment values.
Those are judgment,
ascribed,
exactly. And for me, it's very much about that I feel that those experiences have been, that foundation in those early experiences have been very positive for me, because I think it pushed me much earlier away from the illusion of this sense of someone's always going to be there for you, that I have to find my place within the world and within relationship. And because of that early unmooring, that I think that I had to really rely on myself to sort of find that point of being? Who am I?
Yeah.
And a lot
a fundamental question for all of us.
A fundamental question for all of us.
In all mystical traditions, it is the fundamental question. Who am I? Or what am I?
And I think what I've seen and what I've experienced as a difference between the way I go about answering that question and the way that maybe others go about answering that question is, I think for myself, I'm less likely to look outward to other relationships to answer that question, and more inclined to look inward to answer that question.
Sure.
And I use the word answer carefully because I don't conceive that there really is an answer, but I guess in terms of where to direct the work is more directed inward than it is outward in relationship.
And there's an integration and understanding, right? It's not arriving at some place. But
exactly. Oh, certainly not arriving at some place, for sure.
Ever.
Ever.
This continues on.
Correct.
Yeah.
In my experience,
that's
true.
Too,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So with attachment theory, let's talk a little bit about how that relates to identity.
Well, I think that, the only place that I can speak about that from is a more intellectual academic place. And the reason why I say that is because, as Eckhart Tolle was talking about as well, that, a very young infant, a few weeks old, few months old, they don't have the linguistic capacity to be able to describe their experience.
Yet I want to point out that, because I've been in going back and forth with some people on Facebook, actually, about the nature of truth and truth value and consciousness, and really a part of that is recognizing that the infant's experience from what I gather is really a slow eroding away of this universal experiential connection with all, and that slowly erodes away through this process of socialization and growing biology, biological processes, and so then we get into the place of story making or storytelling, which is where identity and ego come into play, right?
Yeah, that's my understanding as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I think that going back to kind of your question about, these, what the early infant experience is, that, we don't entirely know, of course, because they don't have the linguistic tools to be able to share with us what their experience is. But I think that, I'm not sure. I lost my train of thought.
Beautiful. Take a sip of some Like's Hard.
Exactly.
So, so Lisa and I...
What did you ask me?
I don't remember.
Nor
do I care.
Okay. Yeah. I totally lost. I was like, what the fuck did you ask me?
No, I think we were talking about identity and its relation to attachment and identity formation. And I think where I was going with this is I was wondering if you want to talk a little bit about your work, both and go wherever you want with this, but personally and professionally with motherhood identity.
Well, I think that my interest in this topic of motherhood identity really arose after the birth of my first child, but even more significantly after the birth of my second child.
Yeah.
And they're 2.5 years apart.
Yeah.
And my daughter now is 10 and my son is 7.
Mm-hmm.
So this has been obviously a decade-long journey. But what my experience was of motherhood, of early motherhood particularly, was of extreme ambivalence, extreme isolation, and a real gestalt shift from the life I had known before,
Right.
which was very social and engaging, where I had a multitude of friends, into a world that felt very isolated, of raising a child, of being disconnected from a social world in a sense. And I never talked to anybody about it. I never shared with anybody what my experiences were. One, because I was pathologizing them, and two, because even more deeply, I think that I really felt that it was something unique to me. I didn't believe that other mothers were sort of experiencing this, and by this, what I mean is this extreme ambivalence. And I mean ambivalence in, the real truest sense of the definition of, feeling this deep love for my child, but at the same time feeling resentful of the new isolation and disconnectedness that I felt from the broader world. And that disconnectedness from the world actually led to a deeper disconnectedness to myself. Which is interesting, kind of given what we were just talking about having this internal locus of identity versus an external locus of identity. And I think that maybe the crack in the wall that I thought I had so carefully constructed up to that point really was that maybe I wasn't so internally derived as I had originally thought. And so after the birth of my son, 2.5 years later, I really came up against this very, very deep, it was an ennui, but it was something even deeper than that. And, I shirk back a little bit from calling it a postpartum depression, just because I think that, again, is sort of pathologizing the experience. And for me, I'm more interested in talking from an experiential place. And
because one of the things that labels serve to do is they sort of, we understand it now, we can move on.
Exactly.
Without
I get what that is.
Without delving into the emotional content that is really there.
That's great. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And so for me, the experience was so difficult, in fact, that my previous work with foster kids, which was what originally my master's thesis was going to be about, actually the identity development in foster care youth was my original thesis topic, really gave way to me having a conversation with my wonderful advisors at the university I attended, who said to me, well, this motherhood stuff that you're going through, that you're sharing with us, why not make that your thesis? And so I sat with that idea for a little bit and decided that I was so embroiled in this world that it was really all I could talk about. And so a couple things happened for me at that time that kind of broke things open. And the first was that I, espousing to the theory of attachment parenting, I wore both of my children in a baby sling, and a lot of other mothers were sort of noticing that I was doing this and asked me where I had gotten my sling, and I made my sling. And so they asked me if I could make them one, and so I started kind of this small business of making baby slings. And, at first it was just sort of a commercial enterprise, and, this is going to make a little bit of money and, get me doing something aside from just focusing on the children. But really, it turned out to be this amazing gift. And these synchronicities like you were talking about.
How did it turn out to be an amazing gift?
Well, amazingly, because what I offered to these mothers was not just, here, buy this sling and go home and good luck with it. But I basically said, after the baby is born, I'll help you fit the baby in it, make sure that you're comfortable in it, show you how to use it, in vivo, like, here's the baby and let's figure this out. And so what that allowed me was a really privileged position in these mothers' lives, where they were inviting me into their homes weeks, sometimes days after their first child was born. And what I realized was many of the women, in fact, I have to say a vast majority of the women with whom I worked really were experiencing very similar ennui, anxiety.
When you say ennui, could you just
like a boredom,
yeah.
like a, kind of a, what their life lost some of the luster that it had previously had.
Lack of purpose and meaning.
Lack of purpose and meaning, and this sense of just, I think, such a gestalt shift. And really, I think one of the issues is that in our culture we don't have good rituals to sort of welcome women into motherhood. It's literally you give birth and now you have this child. And oftentimes we don't have our mothers or grandmothers or aunts or other women around to sort of help facilitate that process. No community.
And I know we've spoken about
this at length.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I really was invited into this very privileged space with these women because maybe they didn't feel entirely comfortable talking to their partner about what they were experiencing in the same way that I wasn't, or they weren't comfortable talking to family about it, or even other mothers. And so for some reason, me coming into that space as a near stranger allowed them to sort of share with me what they were really experiencing in the moment as it was unfolding.
Sure.
And
let me just preface this and let everyone know that Lisa, by her very nature and way of being, is what they call in psychology an opener, which is a relationship that is developed very quickly, where people feel very comfortable with you and divulge in a very genuine and authentic way their story, right? You find that's a part of your experience, right?
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, it's true.
That's a very gracious compliment.
It's just the truth. Anyhow.
Thank you. And in these moments, as these women are sort of, sharing with me what's unfolding for them, what I realized is that they had the courage to speak about what their experience was, and I didn't. And my own lack of courage both frightened me and embarrassed me, and I felt called to, if I was going to be in this privileged position to hold this space for these women, then I felt a responsibility to do that for myself. That if I'm going to be able to authentically hold this place that I'm being called unexpectedly to do, that I needed to do some work on myself to really be able to hold that space adequately and to honor their experience, to walk the walk, basically. And so then I began to look at my own mothering experience and really come to terms with the actual experience of it. What was I experiencing? And so concomitantly, as I said, I began working on my thesis.
Let me just stop you there and ask, how do you do that? How do you, for people who are ordering,
Yeah, I mean, that was I'll tell you, that was extraordinarily difficult. I'm glad you sort of stopped me in that place, because because I make it sound like, okay, all of a sudden I just decided. No, what it really meant for me, how I experienced that was that when I was with my children, I was really trying to be as fully present with what was arising in me at a given moment with the children. And I'm sad to say that in my experience and in many of the experiences that other mothers graciously shared with me, that what we often found ourselves coming up against was rage, anger, rage, and really fairly inexplicable for most of us. It was like, why am I so angry? Where is this anger coming from? And so being the dutiful intellect that I'm supposed to be as an academic, and writing a
nerd,
exactly right, and writing a master's thesis, and all that is supposed to purport to be, I set out to create this eloquent mythology of what the mothering experience was like, using my own experience and then sort of validating it and verifying it and, integrating it with what other women shared with me and checking and rechecking and, crafted something that I thought was magnificent and wonderful and passable and, would give me those glorious MA letters behind my name. So I gave it to a very dear friend of mine who's a family doctor and said, would you mind taking a look at this and just giving me your, just your quick feedback? And she looked it over, and was like, wow, this is really beautiful and eloquent. And where's the rage?
Yeah. Good question, right?
Right. And I was like, the rage? What are you talking about? I don't have any rage. What? No! Getting angrier by the moment.
Sure.
And realized, oh shit, like, this is crap. Like, I've just totally, like what Eckhart Tolle was talking about,
intellectualized.
Is totally creating these, content formations and, nice intellectual niceties around like these really deep and emotional places. And I think we all do that.
And I just want to stop
Please.
you there because I think in my own process, part of the difficulty is that we don't have language for the emotional terrain and the varied emotional terrain that we experience in the human condition. So that when we try to articulate things and point them out linguistically, there's a great gap. There's a great gap in what other people understand within themselves, what I understand within myself, how comfortable and fluent I am in my own language as opposed to somebody else's. And I think part of this is just the external impetus to the external emphasis on our life, that there's a kind of neglect of the inner life. And it's a collective condition that we are socialized in, which is perpetuated in a capitalistic consumerism culture that is problematic because...
and that devalues process, like we were just talking about.
It devalues process, and really, when you want to talk about what our experience is versus what is our experience, I guess you could just stop it there. What is our experience, and what are we distracting ourselves from internally that is so terrifying, I think that's a really fundamental question, especially in this, and you can see it permeates our society, and I don't mean to get off on a tangent here, but with the hyper-violent media, the hyper-sexualized media, and it's reflection and perpetration of violence in our culture that's experiential, that is seen one against the other. And really, from my perspective, that I've been able to overcome great violence that was done to me through silence and persistence and through integration and understanding. And what has born out of me from that experience is really, I guess it could be summed up in a term or two words, would be respect and gratitude, So, but I'm sorry, I went off on a little tangent. Go ahead.
I don't think that you did, actually, because what you were talking about was sort of the far reach of this capitalist notion, which, as we said, devalues process, looks at outcomes, and also sort of sets us in this competitive frame of mind rather than a cooperative frame of mind.
Very problematic.
Very problematic. And in fact, this ultimately, one thing about my thesis that I am quite proud of is that I really followed where it led. And I didn't try to shape it in a particular way.
Sure.
I didn't start out with a hypothesis necessarily. I just tried to follow my experience of what it was and then kind of take it where it led me. And where that led me was sort of to the core of some of these issues that you've been talking about with this product versus process, this outcome versus, the experience, the moment-to-moment experience, the individual versus the collective. And really...
Because, go ahead.
I was just going to say, really, you can see it in motherhood.
Yeah.
It really becomes like a bas relief against this backdrop.
Which is perpetuated by the next generation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that, most people are fairly, comfortable or have seen, will know what I'm talking about when I say like that it gave rise to this hyper parenting or helicopter parenting or, whatever we want to call that. And basically my conception of that, which I ended up exploring pretty in depth in my thesis, was this notion that our children too are products, that our children too are a reflection of ourselves. And I don't mean that in a what do I want to say? I'm not saying that in a judgmental way. I'm saying that in terms of that what my children produce, what they do, how early they walk, how early they talk, how early they read, where they are placed within their class rank, that somehow that has seemed to overwhelm the domain of parenting.
Right.
And that...
Which is really born out of a fear of what's going to happen to my child, right?
It is, I think, authentically born from that, from a very genuine place.
Sure.
Absolutely, it's definitely born, and that's why I'm saying, like, when I'm speaking in this way, I'm not speaking of it from a place of judgment.
No.
It's a place of observation.
Yeah. But it's good to get at that core that it's the very nature of parenting in one sense. Yeah.
Yes. So I think that what I was observing within myself was exactly this, that I was losing the moment to moment with my children and focusing instead on getting them, reading early and, getting them to like music groups early and doing all of these things, because I think in my mind there were a couple things. One, there was, as we were just talking about, this sense of like they need to be accomplished because as a mother, their accomplishment is a reflection of my quality of being a mother.
Sure.
That was one aspect of it. But the deeper aspect of it, which took a little bit more layered, peeling away of the layers to get at least for me, was the sense of that it really was a way to ameliorate my own anxiety. That, I was born in the 70s, and, from that point in time, I grew up with the legacy of girls having equal opportunity. You can be anything you want. You can go to college. You can, the world is your oyster. And sort of to have the red carpet rolled out before you of feminism and say, okay, this is what you can do anything that you want with your life. The red carpet rolls out in 20 different directions. And you go to college and you get good grades and you do whatever you're supposed to do. And then at some point you have children, and you find that those two worlds don't often coalesce neatly.
Yeah.
And so...
They conflict by their very nature.
By their very nature, they often conflict.
Yeah.
And I certainly experienced that conflict. And so... But because I had children and I felt like, okay, I've had these children and I need to take responsibility for them, I sort of opted out of my academic trajectory that I was on in order to take care of them and take full responsibility for them. And so I think that the overparenting that I engaged in was really coming from this place of feeling lost and feeling this gnawing anxiety that something was off, but I couldn't identify what that was. And so by continuing to just put my attention on my children, it was a really good way to not really be present with my own experience. And so that's why doing my thesis, I think, on this topic was even more challenging, but also extraordinarily fruitful. And so going back to my friend, the family doctor, who said, "Where's the rage?" That's when the real work began.
Yeah.
Really, up to that point, it was, it was an intellectual exercise.
Sure.
And when she invited me to explore, really, it was an invitation that I don't think I would have permitted myself to do.
Sure.
And so, as it happens, which is sadly, was not infrequent, where I would get really angry about something, a week later, whatever, from her making this comment to me, I remember walking upstairs and finding that the upstairs hallway was completely trashed. The kids had been playing and they just walked away, and, there were toys everywhere, and it was just a disaster. And that instantly, it was just instantaneous that this feeling of rage came up in me. And it's hard to explain, I think, for people that maybe haven't experienced rage before, but I think most of us have. But, it's like something sort of takes over in you, and it feels very hot and burning. And
let me just stop you there. Eckhart Tolle, if anyone's going to follow up with In the Presence of the Great Mystery or The Power of Now audiobooks, he talks about this very notion also in A New Earth, the pain body. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I'm not.
The pain body is an entity, energy. It's just energy that arises that is of itself. And what is required for it to dissipate is really attention as to what it is.
Yeah. And that was exactly my experience. Exactly my experience. And I realized that I have to go into this. I have to really fully be in this moment of experiencing this rage and this anger. And so I literally sat down on the floor with all of this debris around me and examined, okay, what's immediately arising for me in this moment. And what's immediately arising for me in that moment was, well, I'm too good to be picking up after the kids. Look at, I have, I'm in the middle of a master's degree. I have, a undergraduate degree from an esteemed university. And, I have all of these things like Eckhart Tolle, just talked about. These content formations.
Identity constructs.
And
it doesn't matter whether they're educational, material, spiritual constructs of that I'm a spiritual person.
Exactly. And to sit in that and to admit that I felt that cleaning up my children's toys around me was beneath me was very painful. It was a very painful realization of how intractable my ego had become, really. And so then I was like, okay, wait a minute, that's not the end of this. And began to peel back the next layer. And really, as I peeled back layer after layer after layer, experientially, I sort of arrived at this place of pure nothingness and darkness. And I described it in my thesis, and because this is the image that I sank into, the experience of it was riding the dragon down. And that I literally got on the back of the dragon and let it ride me to the depths. And at the depths of that was this profound sense of emptiness. And I think
ties
that
back, go ahead.
Which exactly, no, please go ahead.
Well, it ties back to the what was the word? Unmoored.
Exactly.
Hey, that's not bad, right?
Exactly. To that unmooring, exactly.
So it reminds me of this Sinead O'Connor quote, and it's actually a lyric to a song. I'm sailing on this terrible ocean. I've come for myself to retrieve.
Absolutely. And we've shared that song before together. Absolutely. And yes, so I think that ironically, this anger that I was experiencing in this moment brought me back to that fundamental unmooring.
That condition that we all share. So whether it's motherhood or being lost in a career, that you are maybe a CEO of something and have this identity formation around being a CEO and all the things associated with that,
Right.
the responsibility that is driven by basic survival needs of like, I need to make money to provide for my family and whatever, but it juts up against our inherent condition, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so I think for me in that position, there was sort of an ironic laugh, perhaps, of well, here we are right back at the beginning again,
Yep.
you know,
Yeah.
right? And all this, you know, I was 35, 36 at this time, and, you know, was like, oh my God, all that work that I've done, and I'm right back at the same place that I was, you know, 2 weeks after I was born.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, goes back to exactly what we're talking about this identity, is that fundamentally we are all unmoored, and that we are grasping for the land. We are grasping for the ship to come and rescue us, or whatever that is.
Absolutely.
But
by its very nature, that is true. But there's also the inherent way in which we experience this, which is there's an evolutionary content to things, right?
What do you mean by that?
Well, that it seems like in some ways we remain stagnant, but in some ways we evolve.
Oh, well, you and I have talked how many times about the spiral, right?
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Tell us about the spiral.
Well, you know, and you can sort of elucidate it along the way too, because you and I, in fact, through our conversations, have really sort of helped to flesh this out.
Yeah.
So I don't want to claim it
No.
you know, that I understand it in its totality. But this notion that it might look like we're coming back to the same place again, but really it's one step up from that place, or 2 steps up from that place. And what I mean by steps up is in awareness that we have we're evolving, exactly. And maybe actually even a better way to think about it is that we're deepening. So rather than moving up, we're moving down. That there's a deepening. Moving in, exactly. That's And so for me, that's exactly the process that happened in that, was this deeper sense of awareness, of consciousness, of, wow, I've been trying to, like this, all of this parenting, hyper-parenting, over-parenting that I was doing was really trying to ameliorate this deeper anxiety of being so thoroughly unmoored.
Which actually had little to do with your children, probably, although they were the targets.
They were the impetus of it, but certainly they had nothing to do with it. And so I think that, you know, the shift then for me became, how do I be as present with myself in my role as a parent as I possibly can be?
Right.
And the other sort of irony, I think, that evolved from this awakening was this sense of, I am so disconnected from my own child, my own inner child, my own childhood. I don't know how to be with them in this place of chaos,
of wonder,
of awe, of you know, I've lost that sense of play.
Yeah.
And really that there's something about
them teaching me
precisely.
Right.
And so I think that's something in that paradigm switched for me, of like, wait a minute, I need to like shore up, so to speak, to them.
Yeah.
And let them teach me.
Absolutely.
Let them be the lighthouse for me.
Absolutely.
Rather than me sort of, you know, knowing, okay, this is where the anchor is, and, you know, come here.
Right.
That it really was a paradigm shift for me significantly.
Because we've talked about value and truth, right? Mm-hmm. But inherently, because each being has value, no matter where they are in the process, our work is to honor and respect that.
Absolutely.
Right? And in that respecting others, we come to really respect ourselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I also felt that it was really important for me to begin to serve as a model in that regard of being fully present with myself.
Yes.
To model to model for them them being fully present with themselves.
Yeah.
That if I can't be fully present with myself, I am tacitly disapproving of them being present with themselves.
Sure.
And like, how can I switch that paradigm
Yeah.
to say that this is the way that to move through the world in such a way as you can find your authentic self.
Yeah, I was
most
thinking when
readily.
you started this train of thought that it really boils down to genuineness and authenticity. Yeah. And
Absolutely.
so it can be manifest in motherhood, but it can also be manifest in a street sweeper or someone homeless,
Absolutely.
as well as a president.
Yes.
So that these in this play that we are all experiencing, the roles that we take are much less significant than how we relate in a deep experiential way to those roles through genuineness and authenticity. Yeah.
And I think to use those roles as guideposts,
Yeah.
For our own authenticity.
Well, recognizing the inherent power differential that exists in society, and my favorite poet is always, and he's here with us tonight, Rumi, and Rumi was well known for honoring children. There was a way of greeting adults, and there was a way of greeting children, and he used to take the time to honor the children as adults in a very respectful way. And so I think that that's a great teaching. That, I mean, of all the things that Rumi left behind, that is one great one. I think that that the valuing of that process of children is beings unto themselves, whole and complete. So yeah, that's cool. What else, Lisa?